Good morning, everyone. My name is Mornette Lewis, and I'm from Lewis Life Coach. I'm a certified counselor and a certified life coach with experience several years in the counseling area. I counsel in domestic violence, relationships, self esteem, addiction, and many other related fields. And I had a topic this morning that I wanted to discuss is questions and answers for toxic relationship. And the first thing is, what is toxic relationship? And toxic relationship is characterized by being insecure, self-centered, domineering, controlling. All of those are signs that you are in a toxic relationship, and that is something that you need to look at. Now, after we know the definition of toxic relationship, because sometimes we ask ourselves, what is a toxic relationship? And like I just went over, if you're falling into those categories where you questioning and thinking, the insecurities pop up, the self-centeredness, domineering, controlling, all of those things pop up, then you know those are the signs, should be the red flags that you may be in a domestic or toxic relationship. Now, I did jot down some signs just so I can cover it all. I jot down for you guys the signs of a toxic relationship, because sometimes we're in a toxic relationship, but we really don't know. We're questioning ourselves, or am I in a toxic relationship? Or what is a toxic relationship? But let's break it down into signs that you may be in a toxic relationship. Sign number one, physical or verbal abuse. If you are in a relationship that is physical and it's verbal abuse, because a lot of time we don't think verbal abuse fall under toxic relationship because it wasn't physical. But physical as well as verbal abuse, if you are experiencing that, then you are in an unhealthy relationship. And keep in mind, it can also include sexual abuse too, because a lot of times we feel like, oh, well, it's my significant other, but still, no is no. And still, that falls under being physical abuse too. And that is considered one of the signs of a toxic relationship. And it is unhealthy, and you should not be in that type of relationship. What about constant controlling and monitoring? You get a person that's constantly controlling you, telling you where to go, looking through your phone, looking through your social media, checking your receipts to see where you've been. You know, all of those things is inappropriate behavior for a relationship. You are an adult, and the other person, your significant other, is an adult too. At that time, you should not be constantly monitored. You know, if that's the case, I'm using my own personal experience when I was in a relationship. And let's use one, I was a member of a sorority. And, you know, there was a guy out there watching the cars, you know, making sure nobody break into my sorority sisters' vehicles and stuff. And during that time, my significant other at that time said, and I said at that time because he's not there now, had said, um, well, if the guy's out there watching your car, then that's a man. And why is he watching your car? And I'm saying he's not watching my car. And then I found myself explaining and defending that the guy was watching all of our cars. So that's another controlling, you know, monitoring your behavior. You go to the grocery store, you take too long at the grocery store. When you get to the grocery store, which always seems to happen, where it's only one or two people there, the line is long, so you know you're going to be late. That's not behavior. That is unhealthy behavior. If you're in those kind of relationships, because that means you're being monitored, you know, checking your social media, checking your emails, you know, checking your phone, all of that, that's another sign of a toxic relationship. That's controlling, monitoring the behavior. Though that's another sign. Now, there is a sign number three, that no, Like no is not acceptable. If you are in a relationship and you're in a relationship and the person says no and it's not acceptable, you know, like the person is saying, you say no, I don't want to do this or I don't want to do that. At that point, that is an unacceptable behavior too. But you should not be in a relationship where the person, if you say no to something that you choose not to do and the person is controlling you, that is not a good situation in a relationship to be. That is also non-acceptable behavior and should not. Now, a fourth tip that you are in a toxic relationship, and I want you to be mindful of this because this one is really important. Well, all of them are very important, but this one is if your significant other is not taking ownership or responsibility, you know, everything. You're in a relationship, your significant other, and they won't own this stuff. And I always say, and I always tell my clients, good, bad, or ugly, own your stuff, you know. So sometimes in a relationship, it's one-sided. The person doesn't take ownership. Which means if you was physically abused, if you not taking responsibility for your action, verbally abusive, that those two are all signs that the relationship is unhealthy. You're in a toxic relationship. And listen, we really need to look at these signs. These signs are very important. There's a lot of help out there. But first, like I say, and I'm backing up a little bit just to let you know, the signs of a toxic relationship, the characteristics of a toxic relationship, you got to look at the insecurity, being self-centered, you know, domineering, you know, controlling. And I can't stress that enough to identify and look out for those signs. And if you see that those shouldn't be things that you question yourself, if you fall under those criteria, trust me, you are in a toxic relationship and should be trying to plan. And we'll talk about that as time go on. Carol, did you have a question for me?
Sure. So sometimes what I've found in toxic relationships, and I've had a few of them, is that people, the control comes in a different way. So instead of being like domineering, they use manipulation. And so, and I found that not only in personal relationships, but also in like work relationships and stuff, that there's like a manipulation and gaslighting. And I just came into the room, so I don't know if you talked about that already, but for me, when I think of control, I think of it being like forceful. And I guess I've seen a lot where people manipulate you and try to use your niceness to get you to do the things they want you to do.
Absolutely, Carolyn. That's a good question because that's another sign of controlling. And that is something trying to manipulate. That's another sign of a toxic relationship that I talked about. And then, too, like you said, co-workers, and we're going to talk about that a little later, too, because sometimes it doesn't have to be a relationship. Sometimes toxic people, you know, sometimes our friend or co-workers or others can be, you know, toxic for us, too. And those should be signs and relationships as well. They're not our significant other, but they are relationships that do fall in that criteria as toxic relationship. And I was explaining earlier, and I'm just going to repeat this here because the controlling aspect of the toxic relationship too, because I was in a relationship too, which I had explained, going to the grocery store and the line is long, you get delayed, you're trying to rush home. All of those are controlling too, manipulating you, you know, if you go, you know, trying to tell you to give you tick for tack type of situation in a relationship, which is, you know, non-acceptable. So yeah, and another thing too, in a toxic relationship, you may get your significant other keeping score. like keeping score. Okay, you did this, or you went here, so you can't do this here. That's another sign of a toxic relationship too. And that falls under manipulation too, though, Carol, that on your question you had answered, because keeping score, like if you say, I'm going out with the girls tonight. Well, you went out keeping score of what you did, or you've been a bad girl today, Carol. You cannot go with your friends tonight. That's manipulation as well too, and using that to control you and supersede what the things that you want to do. Now, another thing, you have to stop saying, sometime in a relationship, they lower your self-esteem, your self-worth, making you feel that you're unimportant. If those things happen, that is sign number 6 that you are in a toxic relationship. You stop feeling that you're worth anything. Your self-esteem went down. When you started the relationship, your self-esteem was up, you was confident, you were sure about yourself. But after being in this relationship, at that point, your self-esteem stopped to drop. You stop caring about yourself. You stop looking at, how you look, every day. And that's one thing that our self-esteem and self-confidence should always stay up, because once that is violated, then you start doubting yourself. And usually in a toxic relationship, they will try to reverse that and make it feel like it's you, which putting everything that going bad in this relationship is your fault. And that's another thing that we have to, it's a sign that that's a toxic relationship as well. There's many signs, there's many things that we need to look at. Sometimes we just look at the surface of things. But I know myself, and being in a controlling relationship, I thought, I love this guy and that it's going to work out, and we try to fix everything. And I was trying to make the relationship perfect. But when I find out there's no perfect relationship at all, but at the same time, we do not want to be in a toxic relationship. We want to be, the relationship should be equal, where you're healthy. That is called a healthy relationship. And if we get into, I want to talk about this a little bit too, because sometimes we feel like, oh, we was in a disagreement or argument with our significant other, but we have to understand too, we're human, relationships is up and down. The thing is the level, because it's the way you can have a disagreement with your significant other, but at the same time, you respect one another. Because you can agree to disagree, and still, be in a healthy relationship. That's part of being in a healthy relationship. Because I don't want anybody to think that because, no relationship is perfect. And I say too, and I tell some of my other clients too, I didn't never think that I would get to a point where I would find somebody to meet the criteria and respect my boundaries. I thought, that I'm doomed, this is it. But it does happen. There is someone out there, but we have to stop, take a look at our self-worth, our self-esteem, see where that's at, because don't forget, we've been kind of battered and beaten up along the way. So you do have to stop and take time for yourself and understand, if you're leaving the relationship, it is okay to be alone. Sometimes we find ourselves where we feel like we're alone, and we start, feeling, why am I alone? Why? It's okay to be alone. Sometimes that's a healthy situation, especially just getting out of a toxic relationship. Sometimes it's best to wait, kind of look at yourself, take time for yourself, find healthy things, surround yourself with healthy people, positive people, stay away from the negativity, stay away from that, focus in on the positivity, the positive things that are around you, do things that make you happy, start building your self-esteem up. Because if we don't do that and we go right back out there in the relationship world, and then we start at the same time, we start back to picking those toxic people, which we're going to talk about a little bit later when Carol had indicated about coworkers and stuff like that too, or friends or next door neighbors or whoever, those are people, And then I wanted to kind of touch a little bit on of some questions that we should be asking ourselves, some questions that we should be asking ourselves, to kind of know what's what. in a toxic relationship. Like, are you afraid of your partner? Sometimes we're in a relationship and we're scared. We're scared of our partner. I know I can even speak for that myself. You're scared to say anything. You're on pins and needles in a relationship. And when that is the case, keep in mind, that's another question. If you're thinking about exiting and there's questions that you should be asking yourself, that is one question you should be asking. Are you afraid of your partner? And that fear, is not it's not healthy if you're afraid of them. That is not. So that is one question you ask yourself. Are you afraid? Is your partner willing to change? So sometimes we're in a toxic relationship, but your partner is willing to change. And you sit down and you talk, because like I say too, we're not perfect, even relationships, your partner is not perfect. But the question is, are they willing to change? If they get to the point where they're willing to make those changes to make a healthy relationship, then okay, maybe you want to address it. But if you get to the point where your partner is not willing to change, that's another sign that you should be asking yourself. These are questions that you're putting in your head as to whether or not where you at in a relationship. Now, if you are in a relationship and it has affected your self-esteem, like you started, a perfect example, you started in a relationship, the relationship is going well, but as time move on, your self-esteem starts to lower, and lower and lower. And before you know, your self-esteem is about like that, which means that person again is in a controlling situation. So, and if you're in that, type where your self-esteem is being jeopardized, then that's a sign that you are in a toxic relationship too. And that's one of the tips that you need to ask yourself when you're planning. Now, I'm using these tips as a mean of when you're thinking about exiting, these are the questions you ask yourself. And we went over tip number one. I'm just going to repeat it just so you'll know. Step number one is, are you afraid of your partner? That should be one of the tips. And if you get the answer, tip number two, is your partner willing to change? And when I say that, if the partner is willing to change, then okay, we can work on it. But if the partner is not willing to change and you've expressed yourself what's going on, they're not willing to change, then that's a tip too that you need to be mindful when you're asking yourself, you're on your exit plan, like, should I be, leaving? But if they're not willing to change, the relationship is probably not worth trying to. It takes two in a relationship. Number three, as we talked about, is the self-esteem. If your self-esteem is being compromised in a relationship, then that is a problem as well. How do you feel when you're around your partner? Do you feel comfortable? Sometimes we're in a household or we're with our partner, and at the same time, we're scared. If you're in a relationship and you're in your household and you feeling yourself as being not comfortable, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the physical abuse. Keep in mind, sometimes we're in toxic relationship and we identify it as, well, I haven't been physically abused, so therefore I'm not in a toxic relationship. That tip should be thrown out, because like we talked about earlier, and I can't stress this enough, and that's why I'm repeating this here, because it can be in a lot of different forms, and we look at it from one aspect of it and not look at it from the other aspect. So that's why I'm saying it in different ways, but it comes down to the same thing: toxic relationship. So, the monitoring, the checking on you, checking the phone, where you've been, all those kind of things, demeaning you, lowering your self-esteem, your self-confidence, not allowing. Another thing is, I want to speak on this here, is like, say you have a group of friends, and your friends you're very close with, like in my case, I told you I had sorority sisters, and I was very close with my sorority sisters. But because the significant others in your life, those things, they're not going to let you have friends around. They're not going to want you to attend events. And God forbid if it's the opposite sex there, you know, you cannot, at least in my case it was. But those were signs that, you know, unfortunately at the time, I didn't look at those signs, but now I'm more tuned to it. So those are something that I want to share with you so you can understand. They can be very simple things. Something, like I said, as earlier as something as simple as going to the grocery store, you know, or attending events with your friends, because sometimes that can be a problem if you're attending or going out. Carol, did you have a question?
So I just wanted to say, like, what you were saying about the grocery store really resonated with me because my ex-husband, every time I would go out, if I would put on makeup, he would say that I was putting on makeup because I was going out to cheat on him, or if I took too long at the grocery store, I was cheating on him. And so those constant accusations of cheating, I found, because I had several toxic relationships after that, because you become, you know, until you build that boundary and build that wall and build up your self-esteem, you tend to trip back into that same hole. And they all had that. Like, they all had the accusations of cheating, no matter where you were, no matter what you were doing. Like, even if you were just at the grocery store or whatever, like, it wasn't like you were out really doing anything. And then the other thing I always found was isolation being a big thing, because they like to isolate you and make you feel guilty for being with anybody. And then you really don't have a support system at all, which makes you weaker.
Yes, yes. And I can relate to all those too, Carolyn, especially. And then usually in those type of relationship, they don't want people around, because guess what? People may start telling us, why you doing this and why you accepting that behavior? So yes, yes, that is one thing, you know, I experienced that as well. And I appreciate you sharing your story, because I can relate to that as well. And that's for sure happened a lot. The grocery store deal was just really, you know, and you're on pins and needle, because I don't know if you can relate to this, Carol. If the line is long and they only got 2 cashiers inside the store, you know, you're going to be late and you got to do a lot of explaining, you know, toxic, you know, I don't know, but based on what you were saying, if you can relate to that too. But
oh yeah, because you're constantly, well, it's walking on eggshells, you know, which is what I learned to call it later on. But
yes, yes.
Yeah, very much so. You don't want to upset anything, so you know, so for the longest time I didn't wear makeup, because it became a battle. So it was like, okay, I won't put on any makeup, because then he can't say that I'm doing it because I'm going to meet someone or something. And so now I wear makeup every single day just because I can, and I refuse to let somebody tell me that I can't.
Absolutely. You're taking control of yourself. You're taking control of who you are now. Exactly. Yeah. And then too, when you said the makeup thing, that's lowering your self-esteem. So you're not feeling pretty, you know, you're feeling like you're not attractive or whatever. So that's another thing they want to put you in. So, you know, where you don't wear makeup because they know the makeup you making up, you got to be making up for someone else, not because of yourself. But our self-esteem has been affected when it falls into the play like that. Absolutely. So that's another sign. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Another thing I thought, you know, before we kind of wrap it up, I want to talk about how to avoid toxic relationships. You know, we talk about the signs and we talk about the tips and we talk about the questions we should be asking ourselves. But I wanted us to get into how to avoid toxic relationship, because sometimes, and the reason why I say that, because we've been in, say we've been in this toxic relationship for months, years, or whatever, you know, is a long time. Then we forget how to avoid it because we've been stuck, and that seems like the norm to us. So that's another thing we need to look at. And I want you to look at or think about, how do you feel when you are with the person, you know, you with your significant other, how do you feel? That's some things to avoid. When you're with your relationship, or in your relationship, you with your significant other, I mean, what you should feel is that you should feel at peace. You should feel good about yourself. You should feel not in fear. That's a sign that you are in, you know, a good relationship. So how to avoid it is always remember and look back on how you feel when you're with that person. That is one thing that will help us from picking people that may be toxic, because we already know what that looks like. And then when you are with this person, do you feel yourself being in good company? Meaning that it's positive, the vibes, when I'm using the word vibes, meaning around you is positive, you feel happy, you're enjoying yourself when you are in their company. Because sometimes we be in relationships and we pick people and we really don't enjoy it, that the person, but that's a sign of how to avoid it. If you going out with this person or you spending time with this person and you find yourself not feeling like you're in good company, then maybe that's probably something we should readdress, because that usually is not a good sign. So you want to look at that too. And when you're with the person, do you feel your best? Because sometimes when you're with the person and they shoot you down, say you felt good, perfect example, you felt good, I'm going out, I'm going to spend time with my significant other, have a great time. But then when you get there, you find that it's not, the company is not good. You start feeling bad about yourself. That's a sign that you really want to look at so that you can avoid it. So we look at these things. And another things too, in relationship, as it relates to avoiding toxic relationship, you should always have boundaries. And people say, well, I don't know, chances are, and including myself, and I'm so guilty of this too, there were probably red flags a long ago that I probably overlooked. And sometimes we get to the point where we start feeling that we can't help this person, we can fix them, oh, it's only, we start justifying and making excuses for their behavior. That's another sign too. So all of those things, when you're meeting someone to avoid, is have those boundaries set down. And usually if the boundary is broken, I kind of now, from my past experience, if one of my boundaries is broken, I'm automatically going downhill. And the relationship is probably not going to last because I'm probably going to walk away. But, if you talk to the person, depending on what the boundaries is, but a rule of thumb, if your boundary been disrespected, probably the relationship is probably not gonna hold up, and it's probably gonna be toxic, and those things. Always make sure you're in a relationship that you physically and mentally feel good about yourself. When you're together, a person that does things and where you feel good together, you're happy, you spending time. It's not just one-sided, it's not controlling. One weekend you may do something that they like and switch up. Those are healthy relationships. So if you find yourself in those kind of relationships that you don't have those qualities as you walking into that relationship and as time go on, those are tips that if it's reversed, those things that we just listed, then you probably should look at that relationship before investing too much time and energy, because it probably is toxic. So please look at that. And I wanted us to talk a little bit about, because we talk about the toxic relationship, but sometimes too, there is situations where we have toxic people, and people say, oh, okay, we're not having a relationship, a romantic relationship, but it is, a relationship. Carol, I think you had mentioned earlier about toxic people, co-workers and stuff like that. Those are things too, because sometimes too, you can be with toxic people or surrounded with toxic people. What is that? People that is negative. Everything is negative. There's nothing positive. They're always complaining, blaming. Those are toxic. Yes, Carol.
Yeah. So after I kind of got over my toxic relationships, or so I thought, with with my primary partners, then I moved to work-related toxic relationships. So I had kind of seen, before I saw it in my husband, I saw other people and they would take advantage of me, and I started doing the boundaries. And then I realized, in my primary relationships, I had to put a boundary. So I did that. And then I wound up getting a job that pretty much took down all my boundaries. And I mean, it was probably, I mean, the worst imaginable toxic relationship that you could be in, because when your bosses hold the key to everything,
Yeah.
pretty much they controlled everything we did.
Intimidation, yes.
Yeah, we had gaslighting, and we were called names, and people were ridiculed, and people were forced to cry, and and I'm talking about some seriously strong individuals who were forced tears.
That's horrible. That's horrible.
And
but then, yes,
belittled, and people being like just ridiculed in front of their face, behind their back, and and then there was game playing, like they would pit one against the other, and so it was really, really bad. I didn't see it at first because when you start out as the good child, you don't really notice.
Right.
And as you become the bad child, then you really realize what people go through. So it was a very intense environment, one that I had to leave eventually, but it was bad.
Right. But I'm glad too you did, because sometimes we stay there because if it's a job or something, we need money, to support ourselves and all of that. And then sometimes it takes us a while to identify, Carol, because that's what we know, toxic relationship. So sometimes we get stuck and we pick these type of environments because that's what we're used to.
Yeah. And they were paying us a lot of money to put up with the abuse. They were.
Yeah.
The money was good. The money was good. Okay. Right. It was hard to leave that kind of money because, in the current economic climate, it was a lot of money they were paying us, but not worth that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Because there's your self-esteem too. And then too, speaking of that, and it's good you said that, Carol, because that's sometime in relationships where if a female has the kids and, you don't want to leave because your partner, makes the money as a breadwinner for the house. And if you leave, you have no money. That's the same thing, something like a job. It's toxic job, toxic people, but you need the salary, they paying good money. Same as a relationship that you living with the person. And you need to feed the kids, keep a roof over their head and all of that kind of stuff. So you stay
money is like the biggest form of control, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why too, before you exit, you have to have the plan. Because if you have a plan in place, start training yourself, start reading, start doing, computer is all over the place now. You can go to the library, start doing self-awareness or start learning a trade or something like that. So when you make that plan, to escape the toxic relationship, and you will have a plan, because sometimes I do understand that it is hard with money. And feeding your kids, or your family and stuff like that. So I understand that. So that can be quite hard, in doing that. But thanks for sharing that, Carol. I appreciate that. That's just really sad, but I'm glad you was able to get out of it. So that's a good thing. And another thing too, in identifying with toxic people, and even at job, is be firm. Sometimes we're not firm. It's okay, well, I don't know, kind of, and we jump and we do things that we know we should not even be doing, but we're doing it because, the person who's toxic had said it. So be firm when you say no. When you say no, it's no. When no means no. Like when that's another, remember, I'm backing up a little bit and saying in one of the tips, the answer was say no. No means no, And another thing too, even with co-workers, Carolyn, this is one of the things you had said earlier, is setting boundaries. People think that we can only set boundaries in a relationship with our significant others. No, boundaries is with anyone in your circle, your environment, your co-workers or whatever. Set boundary. They cannot disrespect you, and you protect it. Now, back in the day, that's probably was an issue, but now you have a lot of statutes governing you from people not being abusive towards you at the job. So set boundaries at the job. Carol, let me ask you, when you were there, did you try to set some boundaries with your coworkers, or yeah, was that anything that you tried?
Not really. The whole environment was set up by the owners to be that environment. So it was really difficult because even the HR director was kind of in their pocket and pretty much did whatever they were told. We all did whatever we were told to do. I mean, that's not the right way to be, but it is the way it was. Yeah. Because if you didn't, you knew the backlash was horrible and there really was no place you could go. Now, granted, you could try and go to outside authorities, but in this particular case, that would not have worked. So,
oh, wow.
So because you would have had no support, because pretty much it was either you were in or you were out. That was it. And so if you made a run for it, so to speak, against them, there would have been no support for you. Everybody would have said, we know what you're talking about. And I mean, yes, you could have gone to the lengths of trying to record things and stuff, but understand we weren't even allowed to bring our personal phones in. We had work cell phones that were on us 24/7, that gave them tracking, that let them know where we were, like, I mean, all kinds of stuff. So it was a very, I mean, that device alone was a controlling device, because if you didn't answer, even if it was in the middle of the night, you would be berated. So you had to like answer your phone 24/7, no matter what you were doing. If you were at a funeral, if you were on vacation, it didn't matter. You had to answer the phone.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you got away from that, because it don't seem like any of these tips would work. And in that case, and you demonstrated and shared with us an extreme toxic situation with an employer, you know. So that the only way out of something like that is make your plan and get out of there, because it doesn't look like, you know, everybody was trying to save their own skin, I guess, because the situation there. So
right.
That's a
and we did. I actually wrote in my resignation. I didn't give a 2-week because they typically wouldn't accept a 2-week anyway. So I sent an email to the owners of the company, and then I shut off my device completely, so they couldn't respond to me. And when I arranged via email to go pick up my stuff, I actually brought someone with me, because it didn't feel safe to me, and you never knew what was coming next. So they could say that I did A, B, or C, or whatever, depending on how resistant they were to me leaving at that time.
Yes.
Fortunately, they weren't, because we were kind of on the outs anyway. So I did my resignation. I pulled away. I went and picked up my stuff. I brought my boyfriend with me to go pick up my stuff, and that was it.
Good.
And you know, I had him drive me and stuff, because I didn't know what would come if I went by myself. I didn't trust it. So
yeah, that's where that fear came in, and we had said talked about that earlier, the fear that and relationship with our significant others, but fear also can be, you know, with our friends and our co-workers too. But it was good, you did a good plan, is that you brought someone with you, you know, you didn't chance going along. And that means another thing that we tend to forget is to have a plan, you know, and you did by bringing someone with you. Right. I'm sorry you even had to even experience something like that, but I know.
You know what? It makes you stronger. As you learn and you grow, it makes you stronger. So
yes. Yes. And I can relate to that, because like I was saying earlier, that, you know, it made me strong. You hate to have gone through the situations to come to this point, but it does make you stronger. That's for sure. And then I wanted to say another thing too, with our coworkers and friend, and kind of tying this up, is that don't be too nice. And people say, oh, well, you know, I'm nice. And oh, what do you mean by don't be so nice? Don't be so nice, because sometimes, and I don't know if anybody can relate to this here, when you say don't be so nice, sometimes people take your kindness for weakness. Understand that. And you got to understand the signs. If they're taking your, don't be so nice. If you want to say no, say no. If they really your friend, or they really not trying to use you or take advantage of you, then they're going to respect the fact that, you know, you're nice, but I'm not going to take advantage of you. I'm going to, not force you into doing things you don't want to do. And sometimes in a workplace that can happen too, or friends. You can be out somewhere. That's how a lot of situations happen. I worked with the court system for many years, and sometimes that was the same thing. People did not want to say no. They wanted to be nice because this is my friend and my friend wouldn't do this. But sometimes you have to be aware. Sometimes your friend could be the toxic person that you can live without. So look at that. Realize it's not your job to save people. Sometimes we feel like we have to save and fix everybody. It is not your job to do that. I'm not saying don't help people and don't be a support if people need you, but don't feel like you have to save them. Or they have the problem, but they pushing it on you, so now I got to save them. No, that is not your job to do. Know when it's done. When you're done with a relationship, whether you're in an intimate relationship, whether it's a friend, whether it's a coworker. No, enough is enough. I'm done. Because sometimes when you say you're done and you go back to a relationship, like if you, Carol used the example of boss, at a workplace. But now, had she went back to that, she said, when she done, I'm done. I will not be back. And sometimes that's something that we really need to, look at, and we really need to pay attention to that too. So don't say no if you don't really mean no, or if you're done and you're not sure if you're done, don't say it, because usually, even in an intimate relationship, as well as friends and co-workers, because usually people, if you say you're done and you come back, then the next time you're really done, they're not going to take you seriously. So make a plan, have everything in place so that when you do say it, you stick to it, and then it means more to that person. They know you're serious about the behavior. And I wanted to end by saying that I did put in the chat, I hope everyone can see it, the domestic violence hotline, 1-800-799-7233. Important number, always keep that number. Even if you have to put another name by it, it's a 1-800 number. So usually if your significant other see it, they're going to think of 1-800, usually maybe a bill collector or whatever. They're not going to think that's a domestic violence hotline. So that's another tip. And there's also Aspired app. That's an app that you can download it, those that's able to do it. And one of the features about this app is that if you trying to send a signal out to someone, that's to notify someone that you're in dangerous, you need help. But if they're around you and they walk up, you hit one button and switch to an article. So the person will think you're reading an article or something like that. That's a very, very good app to have. You should download it. It's free. It had saved a lot of people's lives that are in domestic situation. And of course, the hotline, thehotline.org is another meaning. But I really stress that you write the number down. Even if you don't use the website, at least download the app, and protect yourself, understand the boundaries, set boundaries. Don't let people violate your boundaries in a relationship. And ending, if you have to be alone, maybe that's a good time, because that is time that you can build your self-esteem and your self-worth. If you need to chat, reach out to me. I'm Mornette Lewis Life Coach, www.lewislifecoach.com. See you next time. Bye-bye.